With the release of Baldur's Gate 3, getting into a CRPG game that follows the rules of Dungeons & Dragons is no more enticing to newcomers than it has ever been. Considered by its many experienced players to be beginner-friendly, it was enough reason for somebody like me who doesn't know anything about this kind of genre to pick it up and give it a shot. In my initial test, this promising notion of accessibility seems to ring true. I was able to get by in my first few hours of gameplay just relying on default setups and on-screen tutorials. It just bothered me that everything works as it should, I just didn't know how. We have access to all these terminologies like proficiency, modifiers, and saving throw, but are unaware of what they do. So instead of pushing through with my initial campaign, I temporarily suspended it to read the 5th edition of the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. And in this video, I will share with you everything I learned so far, with the objective of giving us rookies a basic understanding of any game mechanic we read along the way. Before we go through the character creation screen, it's a good thing to know that every aspect of the game where the outcome is uncertain is determined by a dice roll. In the format that's used, the first number indicates the dice quantity, and the second number is the max value of it. So if we see a 1d20, it means a single 20-sided die will be used. In a lot of cases, we don't have to worry about the dice rolls anymore, because they're assisted by numerical values, making them easy to understand. If our offensive moves would land or not, a dice roll happens in the background and is simplified for us through a chance to hit percentage value. When we need to ascertain the amount of damage our magic would do, the spell description conveniently gives us a number range, and the exact value upon contact is generated. The same thing happens if our character steps on vines laying on the ground. The chances of them getting snagged by its thorns or not is automated. In dialogues, the same mechanic is visualized for us, if we would succeed or not in stopping an NPC from hurting another as they engage in a verbal spat.
Enough! Squabbling is pointless.
The odds of our characters to win these dice rolls depend on what they're good at, which is summarized in these 6 attributes called the ability score. All dice rolls serve to challenge one of these, and since we only have limited points to distribute, it's expected for our adventurers to be really good at some things, and not so much on others. This is where the importance of cooperation comes into play. Each member of the group utilizes what they're an expert at, while covering for each other's weaknesses. The value indicated in each ability score, however, should not be the focus of our attention, but rather the number associated with it called a modifier. It begins at 10, which has a value of 0. From here, the amount added or subtracted will affect the modifier, which has a simple formula of x minus 10 divided by 2, and the resulting number should be rounded down. So if our intelligence ability score is 9, we subtract 10 from it, giving us -1, then divided by 2, resulting in -0.5, rounded down, our intelligence modifier is -1. If our strength ability score is 16, we subtract 10 from it, giving us 6. Divided by 2, it means we have a strength modifier of 3. An easy way to determine it is every even number that comes after 10 will raise the modifier by 1, and every odd number lower than 10 will reduce it by 1. This is the important value that affects multiple aspects of an adventurer. If we take a look at the skills list, all of these stem from one of the 6 abilities. For example, deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion are all connected to charisma as shown in the pop-up window. So if we raise that ability score to 16, that gives us a +3 modifier. The connected skills rise by the same value accordingly, and therefore our character is considered proficient towards them. So the next time one of our characters is about to do an interactive dice roll, in a dialogue or interaction that challenges one of the skills as shown in its corresponding window, we now know where it's coming from, and it's called a skill check. For example, if there's a locked door that we'd like to pick, it only makes sense to let one of our party mates, who is proficient at sleight of hand skill, do it for us.
With pleasure.
Skill proficiencies can also come from other aspects of our character, the most obvious of which is the chosen background that allows us to select from 11 pairs. Depending on your chosen race, some of them have specific skill proficiencies as part of their feature, while others don't. Elves, for example, have a bonus skill proficiency to perception, as indicated here. In the case of humans, the race feature allows us to choose whichever we want that's not already taken up by the background. Depending on our chosen class, it will also open up several of them and let us select 2. Skills are one of the 4 types of proficiencies in the game. The other 2 are weapons and armor, which is mostly determined by character class, as seen here when we flip open the details window. It could also come from race, depending on what's stated in the feature. Humans, for example, have something called civil militia, which makes them naturally proficient with some polearm weapons, as well as light armor and shields. For the most part, there's no good reason to wear equipment that our character is not proficient at. The penalty associated with it is severe. There are some instances where the character might not use them at all. Barbarians and monks, for example, are discouraged to wear armor because of a class feature called unarmored defense. With regards to weapons, as mentioned earlier, most of the calculations are already being done for us, so there are only a few things to keep in mind. 1. All melee weapons get their bonus damage from the strength modifier, unless there's a finesse indicator in that weapon's description. If our adventurer's strength ability score is lower than dexterity, it will get its modifier from the latter instead. When a weapon is tagged as being two-handed, just like what the name suggests, it needs to be held with both hands, unlike those that are marked as versatile, like this spear for example. It means we can wield it using both hands or pair it with the shield. This same weapon also has a thrown property, which can do exactly that, and will use the same modifier. Light weapons, meanwhile, are those that can be dual-wielded by any race, as opposed to heavy ones that are not only two-handed, it also cannot be used effectively by races of small stature. Ranged weapons like bows and crossbows get their additional damage from the dexterity modifier. The range indicated in its description is the maximum normal range, visualized through a white circle as we prepare to launch an attack. If the target is beyond it, our chances of landing a hit is reduced, as indicated by a disadvantage prompt. The same thing happens if the target is too close, or if they're in an elevated position. On the flip side, we can get an advantage over them if the positioning is reversed, allowing us to maintain decent accuracy, even if the target is a bit further away. It's also worth noting that bows, in particular, have access to specialized arrows that can do different kinds of damage. They're part of several damage types available in the game. Slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning are the most common ones usually attributed to melee and ranged weapons. We also have elementals like fire, lightning, and cold commonly associated with magic spells. These damage types should be matched according to a foe's vulnerabilities or resistances, because the damage would either be doubled or halved accordingly. In order to find out what those are, all we need to do is to right-click at a foe and choose Examine. If, for example, we get in a fight with a bunch of tieflings, it's a good thing to know that their race features include a resistance to fire, so casting a firebolt cantrip at them would be ineffective. Objects, on the other hand, display their vulnerabilities and resistances in a convenient manner. If we examine this locked chest, for example, the bottom panel indicates what we're looking for, represented by icons. Ones with a green arrow pointing upwards mean they're highly resistant to it, and the red ones pointing down reveals their vulnerability. In this case, the bludgeoning damage icon tells us that this thing can be smashed open. Moving on to defense, if our chosen class is expected to wear armor, the way it works when protecting a character against melee and ranged attacks is simply determined by the armor class, abbreviated as AC. This depends on the value indicated by the armor itself, including shields, and possibly by our dexterity modifier, depending on the weight type. Light armors would use in full the dexterity modifier in its AC calculation. Medium armors would only utilize up until +2, so dexterity scores beyond 14 will not count. Heavy armor, on the other hand, will only use what's indicated on the gear, and will disregard the dex modifier completely, even if it's a negative value. This means that characters proficient with heavy armor who intend to wear them have an option to drop their dexterity to a default score of 10 or lower, and reallocate the points somewhere else. It's also worth noting that some light and medium armors have a stealth skill disadvantage on them, which means they're quite noisy to wear, so sneaking around will be more difficult. All heavy armor sets share the same disadvantage as well. When it comes to defending against magic, the way it's calculated depends on the spell itself. A firebolt cantrip, for example, is considered as a ranged spell attack, which means it will have to surpass a target's armor class. Burning Hands, meanwhile, needs to be defended with a dice roll that will add the target's dexterity modifier. So if the recipient of that magic is our heavy armor wearing fighter I mentioned earlier, who probably has a very low dexterity score, Burning Hands would hurt a lot. Any type of damage or negative effect that are not challenged by a character's armor class, such as this, is what's known as a saving throw. All characters have a saving throw bonus on 2 abilities, depending on their chosen class, and is the 4th type of proficiency right alongside weapons, armors, and skills. Gnomes, by the way, have saving throw bonuses on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma as part of their race feature. The information written on the race panel are descriptive enough for us to understand what each one are capable of. There's the base racial speed, which informs us of their movement swiftness in combat scenarios. Some races also have dark vision, bypassing the need for them to carry a torch in unlit areas. Half-orcs in particular have a skill that would save them from being downed when their hit points reach 0, as well as a critical hit bonus damage. The other ones that have technical jargons in them have already been discussed earlier, except for magic, which we'll get into as we talk about character classes. On this panel, the information we'll find are actions and features. If they know magic, there will also be cantrips and spells as well. Features are passive capabilities specific to that class, while actions are parts of what we actively use during combat. Regardless if it's a normal attack, a magical spell, or sprinting and jumping, they are all considered actions and are split up into 3 categories: action, bonus action, and reaction. In most cases, we can only do one in each group per round, except for ones that have limited number of uses per rest, or if something alters the restriction. Reactions in particular can only be activated if something triggers it, like this missile snaring action, for example. As we look at these class actions, you'll notice at the bottom what kind they are, along with a matching logo. A green circle for actions, an orange triangle for bonus actions, and a purple star for reactions. Now that those portions are made clear, it's time to talk about magic. An important thing to keep in mind is that the ability modifier which spells use depends on the character class. Wizards, for example, rely on their intelligence modifier, while bards harness charisma modifier. Thankfully, we don't have to memorize these things because the game clues us in on each class's primary ability, in the form of a star right next to it. If we hover over the ability text, the pop-up window also describes which other classes use the same trait. Cantrips are a lineup of spells that we can cast without limitation, unlike others that require spell slots. An easy way to think about that mechanic is like a magic usage budget, but to make things clear, we'll use this human wizard with default ability scores as an example. We start off by choosing 6 spells from what's available to determine which ones this character has learned. In this case, I chose Magic Missile, Grease, Burning Hands, Witch Bolt, Mage Armor, and Ice Knife. These represent our known spells, but from here we go down to Prepare spells and choose 4 from among those 6. Magic Missile, Grease, Burning Hands, and Witch Bolt. These 4 are now our prepared spells, the ones we can cast. Since these are all level 1 spells, they require spell slots to use, as reflected on the class description. If we go down to class feature, it says we have 2 level 1 spell slots, which means we can only cast 2 among these 4 prepared spells once, or a single spell 2 times before the budget runs out. In the case of wizards, they have a class action called Arcane Recovery, which would replenish the spell slots. Warlocks and sorcerers, on the other hand, can only learn 2 spells initially, but they don't need to prepare it before using. The same thing goes for bards, except they will learn 4 spells instead of 2. At this point, most of a spell's quality have already been discussed, and here are the ones left out. If it says melee, it means the spellcaster has to be really close to the target. If there's a concentration descriptor, it means the effect would persist according to the number of turns indicated, as long as the caster doesn't get damaged. If there's a line that says X number of meters right next to it, that is a spell's maximum range. But unlike distant shots with a bow, we can't cast magic beyond its limit. The character would have to get within range. The same disadvantage penalty, however, applies to long-range spells if the target is too close. When there's a circular icon that says X number of meters, it designates an area of effect for that spell. Hit points, actions, and spell slots can be recovered by resting. Some of them require just a short one, while others need a full night's respite. This requirement is also written in their respective descriptions if available. Hopefully, this video covered most of the basics that you need to know, so that any in-game description you read along the way would now make more sense. As I've said at the beginning, I'm a newcomer to this game, as well as to Dungeons & Dragons rules. But if you have any questions or would like some clarifications, the comment section is always open. Thank you for watching.